Hey friends, today we're going to be looking at three very important aspects for creating video game music or music in general. And on the theme of threes, the song we're looking at today is actually made using only three notes. Now, this is one of the three songs that I made for Orca Jam 2024. If you want to check out more on how to make video game music, feel free to pop over to the other videos. But today we're going to be focusing on some very important characteristics for creating songs. I made this song for a game called Colossus Climber, where you're going to be climbing up a bunch of different platforms, trying to get to the very top and poke out the Colossus's eye. But all the way up, there's a bunch of obstacles, and at any point you can fall off and possibly fall even all the way back to the bottom where you have to start again. This was a super cool game, really fun idea, and I wanted to make the music reflect that. One of the first things I started off with was a very jumpy theme, bouncing up and down between C and G, back and forth, experimenting with rhythms to try and add some variation, and motifs, which are possibly two of the other things we're going to be talking about today, and then trying to move up and have the music mimic the game. I know from my own experience, it can be quite daunting jumping into a new project. You almost feel like the world's your oyster and everything's an option, but at the same time, you have too many options and you have no idea where to start and no clue what to do. So with that in mind, the first rule we're going to be looking at today is limitations breed creativity. If you've been gaming for many years like me and following video game music, this might be something that you've heard of or even heard of in a different capacity. Back when they were first making original Nintendo games and Mario games, it was really hard to get a lot of different sound samples inside of a video game. Everyone was competing for space, for the graphics, for the coding, for everything going on. So music back then was limited to a very low capacity. And that actually made some of the best songs, in my opinion, on video games. I love original Mario soundtracks, Zelda soundtracks, and they did them using sometimes only 5 different notes. And you can take this concept and run with it in as many different ways as you like. You can limit the number of instruments you're using, you can limit the number of notes you have in your scale available to you. And one thing that I've been experimenting with recently to really help my creative process is limiting the amount of time I have to actually make the song. I often find that if I give myself a long time to make a song and don't really put a limit on it, I'll just go into the weeds and try to figure out every minute thing that could be slightly better and chase perfectionism. And if any of you creatives out there have tried to chase perfectionism before, you probably know that it is an impossible goal to reach. It is a horizon that keeps moving forward as you try to walk towards it. So limiting the amount of time you have to even make a project can be so powerful for completing your songs and moving on to the next thing, and you're always learning as you go. So now we're going to be talking about number 2, creating a motif. If you are unfamiliar with the term right now, you'll probably recognize it as soon as you hear Beethoven's Fifth, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum. It's a short melodic phrase, often with different notes and a specific rhythm that can get repeated throughout an entire song or many different times, and often even varied. So the specific pitches or maybe even the way that it's rhythmically placed changes, but the motif as a kind of concept stays the same. And this creates something that you return to, something that's an earworm, something that your listeners will recognize, and something that creates a good, fun experience. Motifs are so important to creating songs. Now, not every song needs to have a motif. If you're off adventuring in Tears of the Kingdom, you might want to have the instruments just rolling along where people aren't coming back to the same thing all the time because they're always finding a new thing in the game. However, a lot of motifs can be super powerful, especially when they're tied to characters. We often find a motif for the main character or perhaps the main sidekicks or the villain. They will each have their own things that come about in different song pieces, which you might not recognize on the surface level, but it's there to tie in that game and the themes overarching it. A great example of this is with Game of Thrones. There's melodies for Cersei, for Jon, for Arya, for all of the different characters, and they come together, and some of the best songs they have, like Light of the Seven or The Night King, bring in the theme of chasing the throne as they go into the song. It's so powerful when used correctly. Rule number 3, which you may have heard me going on about in my previous videos, is to add variation. You want your song to be new and interesting at all the different parts. You don't want to get stuck in a rut where people just start to tune it out because brains are really good at detecting patterns, and all of a sudden people are bored with your music. Some things can still be very catchy and earworms, even without much repetition. Baby Shark is a great example of that. But how many people are happy having Baby Shark stuck in their head? That's up to you. So let's take a look at the actual song here, and I'll talk about some of the things that I tried to do. Starting off, I wanted to have a kind of bass note staying the same, then jumping back up and down in a much quicker succession to simulate the character jumping on the different platforms. And you may have already noticed this kind of motif that starts to repeat here. There's a couple of other smaller motifs, but this GGF in 16th notes, then down to a quarter note, is super, super fun, and I absolutely loved trying to fit it in as many different places as possible for the song. And as we go along, the character's climbing up even higher, so the music starts to rise with that. This was a super fun piece to try and make, and as you can see here, we're only using C, G, and F, 3 different notes. But because we've got a lot of different rhythmic variations, some motif variations inside there as well, it still kind of feels full. You could obviously add a lot of different chords. You could use a traditional scale with this, but I wanted to create something that was fun and had that limitation of just using a couple different notes. As I was creating this song, I started with this very simple quarter note pattern down here, and then tried to add some offbeat rhythms jumping up and down. And that was pretty much all it took to start figuring out a bit of motifs. I just played around with where the notes were being placed, tried to see what I felt worked best, and then stuck to some themes and just kept repeating this same little motif in different ways all throughout the song. And especially having fun with that motif where it then bounces up instead of going back down. So this F, instead of being down here, jumps up an octave. And then we move the bass line of the C over and up as we go along. Forgive my mouse movements here. But you can see this motif popping up all over the place. The other notes aren't staying the same either. They're being varied, and we keep moving the song in a great direction as we go along. Another fun thing you can do with motifs and variation is to move them around to other instruments. So I took that same motif and moved it up into this woodblock xylophone type instrument and had it repeat in the different sections that were brought in and out throughout the song as well. And then we also have an orchestra over here, some woodwinds and some violins repeating these chords of G and C only, and occasionally some octaves of G's, C's, and F's to add a little bit more harmonic content to the song. And then a pretty fun, simple little drum pattern that's going on here as well. And there's so many different ways to vary your song. You don't have to just come up with new musical ideas all the time and have it be something that takes you forever. As you can kind of see in this orchestration here, some of the variation just includes bringing the instruments in and out at different times, or instead of moving in a downward pattern here, we move in an upward pattern instead. And varying when things come in and out is such an easy and fun way to add dynamic movement to your song where it doesn't get too similar or too same, especially when it's something fun that someone listening will like and be like, oh, I want to hear that again, and then they'll kind of wait for it to come back around. I had a lot of fun trying to make the wood blocks sound like that, where people would want to have it come back more often. Creating songs and creating music is a very unique thing to every person. Anyone who's trying to sell you a roadmap of how to make a perfect song every single time is just trying to sell you something. However, my goal here is to teach you tools that you can use to avoid the pitfalls that I've fallen into and make your journey easier. There's also so much that can be gained by watching other people do things and taking ideas of how they're doing it that you can then use yourself. So that's one thing that I really am focusing on with these videos, and let me know if there's anything else that you think would help to create music for you.